Hi, Emelie. Thank you so much for coming on the Living Swedish channel. You are basically a Swede who left Sweden actually several times, and you are back already for a few years. And you're also my very good friend, so it was easy to find you.
Yeah,
We know each other from London times. And I just want you to maybe briefly introduce yourself so that we have a good start to all the questions which are coming up.
awesome. Thank you so much for having me on your channel, which I have, of course, known that you've been doing for a couple of years now, but it's exciting to be here for the first time on screen. So, as you were saying, my name is Emelie. I'm Swedish, and I'm born in Sweden. I live in Stockholm right now, but I have lived abroad several times. The first time was between the age of 10 and 14. I was living in the States together with my family because of my dad's work. So I attended an American public school. I was thrown into a world where I needed to speak English every day without knowing the language at all, and so on. But then we came back to Sweden, and when I was around 20, I moved to Barcelona for a while to study Spanish. And after that, after coming back, in 2014, moved to Tokyo together with my husband. I was there or based there for a year and a half. After that, I went to London for 2.5 years where I met you. And now I'm back in Sweden as of 2018. And shortly about myself is that I am a freelancer. I've been working in digital marketing and digital strategy communications for almost 15 years now. So ever since I started moving, at least from when I moved to Tokyo, I started working remotely as well. So I also call myself a digital nomad, even though I'm very much based in Stockholm today. I still work remotely and I still do a lot of support for the digital nomad community in Sweden, where I also am part of funding a network called the Swedish Nomads or Svenska Nomader, where we gather 9,000 Swedes who are all digital nomads to discuss what it means to work remotely from other parts of the world or from other parts of Sweden.
Very cool. Great. Are you ready for the questions?
I'm so ready.
So I don't know if we will be able to answer all the questions, but I basically put up a little post and people posted some of the questions, and we will do our best to answer each question with your background, and maybe I can chip in as well. So the first question is, so Sweden is a dream place for many people. What made you leave it?
I mean, I think that even though Sweden is amazing, of course, there are so many amazing places around the world. And if you never leave your home country, you miss out on so much. I mean, we are a population here of around 10 million people, but the world is humongous. There's so many different perspectives, people, cultures, so much else you can learn. So I never had an intention of leaving Sweden forever, but I definitely see a lot of positives in moving and being based in different countries during periods of time, especially if it's longer periods of times, because that's when you really become part of the local society, a part of local communities. You get to know people. I mean, I would never have had the same types of perspectives or experiences if I had not, for instance, studied abroad in the United States when I was younger, if I hadn't met the school system there, the way it worked. And also when it comes to Japan, I mean, it's such an amazing country, but I would never have been able to grasp the fullness of it if I had just gone there for a 1 or 2 week trip, as opposed to being based there partially for a year and a half. So I guess the experience and also realizing that the world is so much bigger than your own country. So that's what made me leave.
Yeah, I love that answer actually. Yeah, you're absolutely right in my opinion.
Yeah, right.
So thank you. So the next question, because we actually have about 9 questions, so if I rush through it, sometimes it's so we can just move on. Having lived in other countries, how do you feel about the cost of living and affordability of housing in Sweden? For example, where did you have the most disposable income? And then there will be some details of the post, which I show then later here in the video. But yeah, this is the main question, basically, the cost of living and affordability of housing.
Yeah, I think everything really depends on how you want to live and the way you want to live your life in general, because of course Sweden and Stockholm can be seen as expensive, although right now, because the Swedish krona is a bit weaker, and we actually see a lot of people coming to Sweden now for tourism and other reasons, just because it's all of a sudden become cheaper. So I do think that the cost of living, I mean, same thing when I was in Tokyo, the cost of living there was actually not that expensive for us, for instance, because the Swedish krona was so strong compared to the Japanese yen. So for us, everything was much cheaper than it would have been here. I mean, I think that during a year and a half, we almost ate out for lunch and dinner almost every day for, yeah, for 18 months. And that would never have been possible here in Stockholm, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
but there was, because there was so many other types of options. Of course, there are super expensive things you can do in Tokyo as well, and there are much cheaper ones. And same thing here in Stockholm. What I do think is a bit more difficult is that in Japan and in London, or in England, at least through my experience, there are more agents that help you find apartments and houses that you can rent. Whereas in Sweden, at least from my experience, it's a bit more that you need to do the work yourself individually. And I know that you needed to do this as well, since you guys moved here and looked for housing in a different
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah.
Um, because there are really like no bigger guides where you can go in and then you have someone like an office you can go and someone helps you find something. It's more like you look on online sites, you need to call the person who has the apartment to rent out, for instance. And I know because we rented out our apartment when we were living abroad for periods of time. And I know that we had so many different people reach out to us, and a lot of them were foreigners. And it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult. I mean, if you have like 20, 30 people reaching out to you who want to rent your apartment, and then some of them have different references from Sweden, you know that they have a fixed employment here and everything, it's so much easier maybe to select someone like that to go and live in your apartment, because you might have more trust for them. So I don't know. It's not really like a question about the cost, because I do think that it can be cheaper probably to stay in Stockholm than it can in London, for instance. I would just imagine from my experience anyway. But it might be more difficult to find somewhere to live in
Yeah,
Stockholm.
yeah. No, I agree. Like I also follow quite a few like Facebook groups and stuff like that. And I feel you have to be a bit everywhere to actually get some maybe good opportunities. For instance, like I'm part of like an international kind of group, and they posted like a really beautiful house actually for rent because they also went abroad. And I was like, wow, that's a good opportunity to actually do that. But yeah, we also used an agency, but then it got a bit more expensive, of course, because you actually also pay the agency for their work. So yeah, you're right. It's a bit of a, if you put a lot of effort in, you might get away with more costs. If you use like an agency, it's maybe a bit higher. But yeah, in general, the cost of living really depends on your lifestyle,
Yeah,
on where
I
you're looking in central somewhere or a bit further out. Like it's a hard question to answer in general, I feel as
no.
well.
I have also noticed that, because I know in London, for instance, it was very common with flat sharing. And I know we had a lot of friends that were living together with other foreigners. They rented like a bigger place and had one room each, shared a kitchen and so on. In Sweden, I don't think that was as common before, but I have realized also from a lot of Facebook groups that it is becoming more and more like of a normal thing here, that you're
Mm-hmm.
more people flat sharing, living together, and that way you can actually live more centrally, or you can live a bit cheaper
Mm-hmm.
because you're sharing the flat with someone else. So I think that that concept is becoming more like a thing here as well, especially because housing in general, not only for foreigners but in general, is like a really really big ongoing discussion in Sweden, and it is becoming very difficult to buy, for instance, your own place to live, but also the public apartments that you can rent that are like part of the city and that you can get through them are really difficult to get your hands on as well, because people have been in a queue for years and years and years, which means that a lot of younger adults tend to stay at home for a much longer time living with their parents because it's difficult to get your own place to live.
Right.
The way many people do then is that they just decide to go study somewhere else in Sweden where it's easier to get a flat or somewhere to live than it is in, for instance, maybe Stockholm or Gothenburg or Malmö. So it is an ongoing discussion here. It's not that easy, and especially now also with the worse economical times or whatever you should call them, I think that it's a even bigger issue that's being discussed a lot in politics as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy.
No.
The next question would be, what was the reason for you to come back to Sweden, and was the quality of life in places you lived better or worse compared to Sweden?
For me and my husband, we came back to Sweden because we wanted to start a family. And Sweden has a very great system when it comes to maternity and paternity leave, also to childcare and everything. Plus, of course, we have our family here. So that also adds an extra layer of support when it comes to just being able to live your life. So we came back in 2018, and our daughter was born in 2019. And our plan from the beginning was actually to go traveling somewhere with her, working remotely and so on. But then in 2020, the pandemic came, which meant that we never had the ability to leave again. And now, with two kids and both of them in school here, and we're in primary care anyway, it makes a lot of sense for us to be here. So for us, it was really like just the notion of starting a family. With that being said, though, I would definitely, since I have my own experience of moving away for a couple of years when I was 10, I would definitely see ourselves maybe moving for a period of time again. But we don't have any exact plans like that, but I'm open to it if anything turns up. But when it comes to quality of life, I think that people say in general, like if you leave Sweden and you become even more Swedish because you start appreciating the smaller things with the country you're from. I think that's true, like regardless of where you're from. So yeah, I really appreciate a lot of things in Sweden, but of course, comparing life with two young kids to being two people with an income living in central London or Tokyo, of course, our lives are very different than they were. But I think that most places have like they're really like great perks and positives. But Sweden is a really great place to raise a family, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, this is definitely also one reason we came to Sweden. The next question would be, how does the pension work when transitioning through countries? I think this is one of the harder questions as well. Like, you can explain a little bit how it works for you, and maybe I can chip in because I have moved countries several times as well.
Definitely. And I think, like you're saying, it depends so much on everyone's situation. For me, during the time that I've been working, I've never let go of my Swedish residency. So I have been based in Sweden and in other countries at the same time, which has ensured me, because I run my own company, as I mentioned. So I continue to pay tax in Sweden, and I continue to get my pensions here, and also my private pension that I save up through my company, or maybe it's called corporate pension actually in English. So I have all that based in Sweden. But I do know that it depends a lot. Like if you go live somewhere and you work there for a period of time, I think that every country has their own set of rules. Like some countries, I know, like if you go work, for instance, in Japan for a longer period of time, I do think that it's more standard that when you leave the country, they actually pay out the pensions you had saved as like a lump sum. Whereas other countries, that might depend, though I can't say that it's 100% like that. But I think it's like that in some countries, and whereas others might actually have that you have safe pension in that country. So once you become when you retire, then you might get pensions from different countries later on. But again, it depends a lot on what country and the period of time you're there, and if you're working there or if you're working remotely to somewhere else, and where you're paying your taxes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It is not that easy to answer for sure. Like, I have a pension in the UK. It's not much actually because I didn't work ultimately not that long in the UK. And I have like an app where I can see my pension, how much it is and how much it is growing. Um, but yeah, I can only access it later on. I don't know also if I could actually get it now already. This is something interesting to maybe look into for myself, if I could get paid already. But it makes sense maybe to even wait as well because obviously it's growing. It like the pension is invested, so it will actually grow over the next years. Um, and then, like you said, you probably get paid like after you retired from that country to wherever you are. But yeah, it depends really. And in Sweden, it will be probably the same, that even if you live abroad, and I'm sure there are some people who actually get a Swedish pension and live abroad, like Portugal. I know I had a comment, someone living in Portugal now. So I think they can also comment on that, maybe in the comments down below. But yeah, I'm sure in Sweden it also works. Maybe you pay some extra taxes, I don't know, on your pension, but you will get your pension paid out. And it doesn't really matter if you live in Sweden or not. It matters that you worked in Sweden for a certain amount of time, and therefore you get paid.
Yeah, I know that there are certain rules, so definitely you need to check that out because I know that's also in the news a lot of times, like what actually happens. And there was something like super beneficiary about living in Portugal and getting your pensions there, and then they changed it. So I know that there are like different ongoing discussions all the time. So I'd say like the boring answer is that you just really need to research your own personal situation because there's no real universal answer to pensions when it comes to people that have lived, moved, and worked in different countries, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah. And having experienced sunny weather in countries, I mean, this is an assumption, I guess, because we didn't know before, or they didn't know where you were living. Why are you returning to a cold and dark country?
I mean, yeah, Sweden is the darkest and coldest country out of all of the places I have lived, so that is at least true. Yeah, I know. You answer or you ask yourself that question every single fall and winter. I know you said when you moved here that it's not really that bad. I'm not that bothered by the dark or the cold. It's not really the coldness that gets to me, it's really the darkness. And up until Christmas, it's all like, oh yeah, it's fine because you still have right now the forest is beautiful. I was out in the forest all weekend with my family. There are like all the colors and everything. It was sunny, but now it will just keep on getting darker and darker. And then Christmas is nice because you have all the Christmas lights. It's
Yeah.
not like winter is over after Christmas. Then it's just like endless darkness from January, February, March. It might start getting lighter, but it's still super cold many times. And sometimes, I mean, it still snows like in the end of April, and you're like, why? Why is it like this? And so I don't know. I'd say like it's still I grew up here and it's still my home country. I still see the benefits of it's nice being at home, it's nice being cozy. I have heard that Swedes actually tend to care more about like interior design and making their homes beautiful because we spend so much time at home and during like the winter months. So your home is more like an expression of your whole personality. And whereas in other countries you might meet out more, but here we tend to go to each other's houses during the season. But I also think that you learn to appreciate the summer and the spring much, much more when you're forced to live in this cold and dark world during the winter. So maybe that's the thing, like the contrasts. You don't get bored because you're always like so surprised by the weather. But that's also like a saying that Swedes tend to always talk about the weather with each other, and that's because we're we're probably so, I don't know, in touch with the weather, and we're always longing for summer and light somehow. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's not easy. And basically, it's just a period of time where you have to go through it and, like make the best out of it. Like you said, concentrate a bit more on your home, make it cozy, pay attention to the little good things during a darker and colder time. But yeah, I'm also like in the middle of it for a few years, and I have, you're right, like up until Christmas it's actually no problem at all, because you have a goal, I guess. And then there comes this period of time where it's just harder, and the spring, which is also a goal obviously, but it takes longer. So you have to be very patient, really, um to and wait until you get all the nice sunny weather and the summer. And you're right, you appreciate it more. And that's, I talk about this not all the time, but a few times here, like how amazing the summer here is. And it's one reason is really that you have the contrast and people really just appreciate it more. So the next question would be, did you have much culture shock moving back? What made it worth moving home after living in several countries? And then there's another question from the other party. Did you notice much difference when you moved back to Sweden? Aside from culture shock, did it feel like Sweden improved, grew as a country, and was a better place than you left, or the opposite? And did you have a vision for your life in Sweden when you moved home? For example, that means I want to start a business or just wing it. Thanks so much. So it's a lot of different questions. Um,
I think that the cool thing, of course, I can't speak for all of Sweden, but if we talk about Stockholm, I think that the cool thing is that Stockholm is becoming more and more of an international city. It's starting to have more of an international vibe in general. There are a lot of foreigners here. There are a lot like professionals that come here working for a couple of years or stay permanently. I mean, you and Chris, you and your boyfriend, you're part of that movement, of course. And I think that we are, because Swedes tend to speak English from a young age. I
mhm.
think that you have said that before, and a lot of foreigners coming to Sweden that want to learn Swedish say that it can be difficult because people always tend to just speak English with you. And I think that's because most people are quite comfortable with speaking English, being part of like a more international vibe. Also because we are such a small country, and when you look at TV growing up, when you listen to music and so on, you get so many like outside influences all the time that you're kind of used to that. So what I want to say with that is that I don't think that I got a culture shock when I came back to Sweden, because I do in like, I mean, actually I do find a lot of similarities, for instance, between Stockholm and London. I tend to think like London or Stockholm is kind of like a mini London in a way. You can get similar vibes as you can in London, with like a more international community with more things going on and so on here as well. Of course, not all Swedes go traveling, not all Swedes are open to change, not all Swedes think it's great with people coming from other countries or people that leave and come back.
Mm.
But I think in general, especially in the types of communities that I'm part of, which is a lot of like freelance communities, you have the digital nomad community, the tech community. And I think that people are quite open to like outside influences, and they just think that it's cool that you lived somewhere else, done something else, that you have different perspectives. And I mean, I meet a lot of people that have lived in other places, done different things, tried out different stuff and so on. And yeah, no, it's another culture shock. I wouldn't say. I think that we are getting better and better in Sweden at just like embracing influences from different parts, and we just find it quite interesting if someone has actually gone and lived somewhere else.
That's good, I think. That's definitely a positive way to see it. And I
Do you
think,
agree, or what do you think?
yeah, I
What's
mean,
your vibe
it's
for
hard
Sweden?
to answer that question because I'm one of those foreigners coming in here. I mean, I personally think as well there is quite a good balance between like Swedish traditions and like exploring really the Swedish way, but also like you said, having I mean, we both live in Stockholm or close to Stockholm, and I'm personally a fan really of Stockholm, and I know that some people who are watching this are not so much a fan of Stockholm just because it's kind of the biggest city, right? So it has a bit of a city flair. And I used to live in London and other bigger cities. So actually, Stockholm is quite quiet compared to these other cities, and you can probably confirm that having lived in Tokyo and also London. Um, so I think there's actually a really good mix, and I love, of course, that there is quite an international scene as well. And you are absolutely right. Like, not every Swede might be like open for that, but the Swedes who are, it's just a joy to connect with them and to really exchange, about anything really, like you said, tech or whatever your interests are. So I think, you can't please everyone, but the people who are open, you make great connections here in Sweden. And I mean, even for me, it was not so much a culture shock, of course. uh, I'm not, too far away, and there are similarities with Germany, but even with the UK, is quite a European country. Maybe it's different when you come from, I don't know, Brazil or Australia or other countries. So yeah. And then another question would be, when living in like Tokyo, for example, or London, what Swedish things do you wish they had in that country? And the opposite, what things from Japan or London, England, do you wish we had in Sweden? Is there anything? Maybe there's nothing.
No, that one is so difficult because I think that every like city, every country, every place has its own charm. And I don't think that we need to make places that much alike, because then we're like losing that unique local cultural charm of each place. And what I do love about Tokyo is that it's so safe and so orderly, and people always stand in lines and follow rules, and that's quite nice, actually. But then again, Tokyo isn't that easy. I mean, if you leave the big touristic areas, for instance, you find that people don't really speak that much English, and then if you don't speak Japanese, it's very difficult to get around and have conversations and do things. So for me and my husband, it was super crucial to learn basic Japanese to just be able to, I mean, thrive and live in Japan outside of the like main tourist
Mm-hmm.
areas. We weren't living in those areas either. So we surrounded ourselves as much as possible with like Japanese culture. And there were things that were different from Sweden. There were things that were similar to Sweden. And there are like both extremes, I guess. But at the same time, I don't really have anything that I think that we need to. No, I can't actually think of anything that I would like want one place to copy from the other, because I think that each place kind of works in a good way, actually.
And I don't know, I have not been in Japan, to be fair, but every now and then I hear something or read something, and I heard also that there are these great toilets. Is that a
That
thing?
that is actually true. Yeah, the toilets are amazing in
So
Japan.
maybe it would be great to have these toilets in Sweden. But then,
That's actually one thing that I hear a lot of people say, in general from Japan. That one thing that's amazing about Japan, not only that they have great toilets that are warm, they clean your bum for you, they play music and so on, but also that there are free, clean public toilets
hmm
everywhere.
hmm
Everything works. In Sweden, and I know a lot of Japanese people have told me this that have come visit me, it's that we have no free public toilets. It's really difficult when you're out and about to find somewhere to go and use the toilet.
that's true, actually.
So that's definitely something. And it's the same in London. I don't recall seeing really nice public free bathrooms anywhere. And you could pay for them and they weren't that nice anyway. So then you kind of have to go into a cafe or something and buy something just to be able to use the toilet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually one good thing about Japan. Also, the trains always run on time. That can be a problem here with the public transport sometimes depending on the weather. If it's
Yeah,
snowy or if there's too many leaves or whatever. In Japan, yeah, the public transportation was just amazing.
spotless. And you mentioned you felt very safe in Japan. Do you feel the same here in Sweden, or is there a difference?
I think it again depends a lot on where you are. Of course, there are unsafe places in Japan. There are unsafe places in London. I know a lot of people said that when we moved to London, like, oh, that's such a scary city. There's so much crime and so on. Of course, as people watching this might know, crime rates have apparently gone up partly in Sweden as well. It's not as safe as when I grew up and people were like, oh, there's no gun violence in Sweden. And now we hear things on the news almost every day, unfortunately. And I do not feel unsafe in Stockholm. I didn't feel unsafe in London or in Tokyo either. But in all fairness, now with two young kids, it's not that I'm out and about during like late evenings that often here in Stockholm. But during daytime, no matter where I go, more or less, I feel safe.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same for me as well. It's a weird thing, but there is the news. The news will always be the news. Things are happening, but like I don't think about it, every minute of the day and think anything can happen, next to me any minute basically. So yeah, I as a foreigner coming to Sweden, I do feel safe as well, and I mentioned that on my channel a few times as well. And so we only have one question left. I think we already discussed so many great things. So the last question is about food. I'd like you to speak on the topic of food. Why is Swedish food so bad? So obviously this is also quite an opinion.
Yeah.
But what do you think about Swedish food? And then obviously you can compare it a little bit with food from other countries.
I mean, of course, I grew up with Swedish food. I think that we have some amazing food. I also think that there's some food in Sweden that isn't all that exciting, of course. But I think that that's kind of like a perception when you come from somewhere and you move somewhere else that some like tastes you like, some flavors you like, some you aren't used to. For instance, I love licorice, the like salt licorice candy. It's my favorite thing in the whole world. I know a lot of people from a lot of places around the world don't really like that flavor at all, which is also a reason why I usually bring salty licorice with me when I go traveling and I meet friends in different countries because I
Mhm.
kind of find it fun that they don't like it. But like another thing, we have dill, which is a flavor we often have like together with herring or potatoes. We have it a lot during midsummer and Easter. I love that flavor, as well as that I love Swedish roe that you can have on like sandwiches and different treats and so on for food. But I do know that everyone doesn't like those flavors. Maybe some people find it too fishy, for instance, with roe. I know that was a thing when we did a party when we were both living in London and I did snacks like that. And I had some British friends that couldn't eat it because it's like, oh, it's so raw. I can't have this. And yeah, I think I know also when I moved to Tokyo, beforehand, I was like, my favorite food in the world is sushi. I love sushi. I'm going to go live in like sushi heaven, more or less. And then I came to Japan and I realized that the Swedish version of sushi, which is like much smaller fish and it's not as broad and so on. I like sushi in Sweden, but in Japan, they had so much pride in the actual fish and ingredients they had. So the fish parts, they were so much bigger and
Mhm.
better. So I could hardly eat sushi in Japan because I just found it too fishy, which
Interesting.
made me feel like such an imposter when I was like, oh, it's my favorite food. I love this country. And then I'm like, no, I can't eat sushi in Japan. What is this? So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that Swedish food is not bad, but everyone will have different flavors and different preferences. I think that we have a lot of great food, but then at the same time, as I was saying, we're quite an international country in many ways. So we do have a lot of influences from different countries. My daughter right now, she's saying that her favorite food in the whole world is tandoori chicken from India, for
Mm.
instance, which is great. Not Swedish tasting at all, but she loves it. We also have, like in Sweden on Fridays, we say that we have Taco Friday and everyone eats Mexican food or maybe a Swedish version of Mexican food to
Yeah.
be on Fridays and so on. So if you come to Sweden and you happen not to like Swedish food, then you can eat so many different things. You have sushi restaurants, although Swedish sushi apparently. You have pizzerias, you have pasta, you have Thai restaurants. Now we get so many more influences. So I think it's just like part of finding your like your private flavors, your personal flavors, and then just regardless of where you are, you find what works for you. But what do you think about Swedish food? Do you find that you like it or not?
Um, I would say I like it. It's not one of my favorite foods, but there's also a variety of food. What is very interesting now, for a few days now, I just went vegetarian. I just decided I'm going vegetarian. So this will be a little bit tricky as well because one of the best foods in Sweden, I thought, like fish, is now something I will not eat. The only big exception I will make is when I'm going to Julebad because one course is herrings, which I really love actually. So I will make an exception, but in general, like I quite like Swedish food. I mean, again, fish is one area which I really like, which will be now a bit of a problem. But I like salty things as well, the caviar, for example, which
That might be a bit fishy as well.
yeah, yeah. um, I mean, there's a lot of potatoes involved in dishes, and that can be good, and maybe also too much for me sometimes. Too much potato in things everywhere.
Potato.
But actually, potatoes is really good. So, also from a health perspective, so it's
Oh,
good to
that's
have so much.
a lot of people claim that, potatoes, you're saying that that's the most Swedish thing, but then it's like, oh, but potatoes didn't actually come to Sweden up until, if I don't know if it was 200 or 300 years ago, but I mean, today in modern Swedish
Yeah.
cuisine, right, potatoes are such an important part, and you see that like in all traditional dishes, more or less. But yeah, no, I love potatoes.
Potatoes and fish.
Italian as a vegetarian.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So we'll explore all the potato dishes even more now. Maybe I'm not tired of all the potatoes. So I'm now embracing a lot of potato dishes in Sweden.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Well, thank you so much. That was so good. I thought, obviously, we will see if any people have some comments. They can leave them down below the video. It will be interesting to have a bit of a discussion in the comments as well. But I want to thank you so much for coming and being on my channel. I honestly thought about you many times, and it's cool that I started these interviews so I can actually have the excuse to invite some people. I really want to talk about Sweden, so this was really great, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
I will see you soon.
Definitely.
Bye.
Bye.